Hello everyone, what is up? It's me, Ewan, and I've just spent the last weekend watching all of The Punisher Season 2, one that is likely to be the character's last and one that is, much like Netflix's other Marvel shows, a bit of a mixed bag. There's plenty of good, but also quite a lot of meh thrown in for good measure, but given the show boasts so many interesting themes, concepts, and plots, it only makes the whole affair even more frustrating. Just a heads up that there will be some mild spoilers ahead regarding the first few episodes of the show, but with that out of the way, I'm Ewan from What Culture, and here's our review of Season 2 of Marvel's The Punisher. Since making his debut all the way back in 2016 with Daredevil Season 2, Jon Bernthal's rendition of Frank Castle has been a clear highlight of the franchise's TV contingent. Season 1 of his solo spin-off cemented the actor's turn as Castle as the character's best, and though that too had its issues, they were typical of a Netflix production, with the middle third lagging behind a compelling opening and even more compelling conclusion. So, when a second season was announced, one that would deliver upon Billy Russo becoming the villainous Jigsaw of the comics, fans were understandably excited, myself included. Stephen Lightfoot's first season had delivered a compelling season of television that spotlighted one of the most talented actors working under the Marvel umbrella. And though follow-ups to Jessica Jones and Luke Cage were found to be wanting in several areas, there was still a good chance Season 2 could deliver the goods. As you may recall, Season 1 of The Punisher left Frank in somewhat of a good place. He'd taken revenge against his family's killers and was granted a deal of immunity from the government in return for bringing down Russo and Colonel Rowlands. In Season 2, we find him drifting from town to town, content with keeping his head down and staying out of trouble. However, when he crosses paths with Alexa Davalos' Beth Quinn, a bartender in a sleepy Ohio town, he begins to think about settling down all over again. With Frank needing to star in 13 whole episodes, however, this proceeds to go to crap almost immediately as Georgia Wiggum's Amy Bendix, a girl caught up in the midst of a blackmailing scheme gone wrong, brings a metaphorical whirlwind to Castle's briefly peaceful existence. The two then go on the run as Castle attempts to uncover why exactly Bendix is being hunted before Billy Russo reawakens from his coma and escapes from hospital, prompting a return to New York and a reunion with Amber Rose Reaver's Dina Madani and Jason Moore's Curtis Hoyle. This all happens in the first 3 episodes, and it's actually those first 3 that are the season's best. They're tight, compelling, and feature some gloriously choreographed and impactful action and riff on John Carpenter's assault on Precinct 13. There is an element of frustration to all of this, however, as even though these episodes are great, the show fails to return to this storyline in quite the same way going forward. The character who suffers the most out of this, however, is Josh Stewart's compelling villain, John Pilgrim, a reformed white supremacist turned Ned Flanders-esque hitman who is basically like some non-giving-up church guy. Also, his kids are basically Rod and Todd, so there you have it. He's kept to the background just a little too much, but the glimpses we see paint him as a far more complicated than just your regular sinister minister type, with a family life and real investment in the story that eventually allows us to understand why he just keeps on coming back for more. He mixes that by holding his own in his action stakes too, making for someone truly menacing when his scenes are allowed to burst into life, and boy, do they burst into a lot of red life and death, actually. But like I said, we don't see nearly enough of him, and this is frustratingly emblematic of the series as a whole. The show brings to the table all sorts of fascinating concepts, such as the idea of punishment in respect to a man who can't even remember what he even did, the age-old question of what truly made Frank the Punisher, or whether he was always that way to begin with, and even the idea of people going to war but then never coming back. All are broached in one way or another, but none are fully explored, which is a massive shame given how clever this series can be at times. Still, there are plenty of positives. Both Amy and Curtis make up for the lack of Micro, whose comic touches and bond with Castle from Season 1 are missed. One is to give Army vet Curtis a beefed up role, and the other is to pair Castle up with the teenage runaway Amy. Both work a treat. Frank and Curtis have a great bond that often doesn't need to be expressed in words. After what they've been through, they're there for each other, no matter what it takes. There's some wry and dark humour between the two as well. While it's partially with them, and especially Curtis, we get a solid exploration of PTSD and war veterans struggling to make their way back from war, which is the messaging where Punisher is on its surest footing. Even better is Frank's relationship with Amy. A street-smart, wisecracking kid, she makes jokes at Frank's expense and gives the show plenty of humour to boot, but it's also crucial to his journey too. She's notably around the same age his own daughter would have been had she not died, something Frank himself is acutely aware of, leading to a surprising sweetness to their bond as they look out for each other, and she pushes him to examine just who he is and what he wants to be. It's also where we get to see Bernthal work best, with the actor illustrating something that has all too often been lacking from previous depictions of the character. In the end, all he wants to do is help people, even if his way of going about it isn't exactly the best way of doing so. And speaking of Frank's methods, the action on display throughout the show is some of the most compelling I think I've ever seen, and it feels unique to the character too. The closest comparison I could make would be that if John Wick is the perfectly orchestrated ballet of death, then the Punisher is his improvised street equivalent. Violence is never without consequence, and the way Bernthal actually engages with it makes for a refreshing change of pace for a character who's often mowed through legions of people without so much as batting an eyelid. There's a good argument for him being the best leading performance in all of the Netflix Marvel shows, and he's once again incredible here. Bernthal perfectly captures the Punisher as a force of nature. He's a raging, frothing, growling, animalistic brute in the action sequences, literally roaring into fights and displaying not even the faintest flicker of remorse. He takes punishment of his own too, and Bernthal conveys his injuries, but also the sense that he absolutely will not give up and will not, at any cost, be beaten. Even more impressive though is how Bernthal plays it in the quiet moments. In the times when he lets his guard down with Amy, we see the sadness and grief in his eyes. In the moments when he cracks a joke, displaying a knack for some pitch black comedic timing, and in those instances just before and after the explosions of rage, when you see the internal struggle between Frank Castle and the Punisher. Bernthal delivers everything the character should be, and then some. But now we have to awkwardly segue into the bad, and one of my biggest problems with The Punisher Season 2 is the actual story itself. There are two principal plots going on at the same time throughout the show, one involving Bendix and the conspiracy to murder her and Frank, and the other involving Billy's transformation into Jigsaw. Those two premises alone would be enough to fill a tightly paced mini-series, but the writers chose to have both in the same one. The more interesting of the pair is the stuff involving Pilgrim and Bendix, but all too often we find ourselves drawn into Russo's transformation, and it just isn't that interesting. Sure, Ben Barnes is great, but there's this romance between Russo and his therapist that just doesn't ever seem like it's going anywhere, as though each time they're on screen, they're having the exact same conversation as before. It wears pretty thin pretty quickly, and even more frustrating perhaps, is that the show still finds time to have some of that patented Netflix filler, even with both these premises going on concurrently at the same time. Ultimately, neither plot gels together particularly well, and there's even an awkward line at the ending where Royce Johnson's Brett Mahoney flat out asks a lead character what any of the conspiracy stuff has to do with Billy Russo. It is the very definition of a mixed bag, but the good that is there is so good that it makes everything else worth getting through. Is it frustrating? Absolutely. But we also have to bear in mind that this is probably the last time we're going to get to see Frank in the MCU, at least for a while. And in terms of giving the character a good, open-ended conclusion similar to Daredevil Season 3, it succeeds and then some. In the show's closing few episodes, Detective Mahoney remarks that, quote, "Nothing is easy or simple when Frank Castle's concerned." And it's so true. He's so many things to so many different people, revered and reviled in equal measure, and the show goes to great lengths to explore what the Punisher actually means. I don't have the answer to that question, but I do know that The Punisher Season 2 is a good, not great, send-off for the character. That's why I'm going to give it 3 stars. But I want to know what you all thought of The Punisher Season 2. Were you a fan, or did it fail to live up to the heights of the first season? Please shoot your thoughts down in the comments below, and head back on over to whatculture.com for more frank Marvel discussions every day. As always, I've been Ewan. You can follow me on Twitter at EwanRuinsThings, and I'll see you next time. Bye!